What have you uncovered that the Yarra Council in Melbourne has gotten up to now?
Well, Chris, Kenny, thank you for having me on your program. It turns out the Yarra City Council and an inner city Melbourne council run by a Greens mayor have decided that they have the answers to the Middle East conflict that have baffled so many people around the world for so long. They've passed a resolution this week to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people and basically blame Israel and the Israeli occupation, as one councillor calls it, for the current conflict. In a statement that the council passed a resolution, it said the council notes with deep concern the escalation of violence in Israel and Palestine. It said Palestinians bear the brunt of the attacks by the Israeli military in Gaza. And it said we express solidarity with the Yarra-based Palestinians whose community is facing displacement by bombings. It goes on to say that they note the complexity of the conflict affects people from all backgrounds and says that they welcome the many diverse residents of Yarra and that they value the residents from the Middle East. But it's had some people in the local council area, Chris, some residents questioning if they really care about everyone from different backgrounds. What about their Jewish residents? There were 3 people in the community who stood up and spoke at the council meeting on Tuesday night. This was brought forward as an emergency motion, so there wasn't even much time to let the community know that this was being debated. And all 3 of those people stood up and said, we don't think it's fair that you're putting this resolution forward. It's one-sided, it's not balanced. You haven't gone to the community for consultation about this, but still it was voted 5-2 in favour of this resolution. Now, I've got some reaction today from Jewish community leaders. One of them, Alex Rivkin from the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, said this is plain insane.
Well, it's absolutely loopy politics on many levels. Firstly, when you look at the actual substance of the motion, it's entirely one-sided. It doesn't even attempt to strike any balance.
But Chris, if our viewers think that the resolution that passed is perhaps extreme and
one-sided,
etc., it is actually worse. The proposal that was put forward by Councillor Stephen Jolly in its original format. Now, this councillor, who was a former member of the Victorian Socialists, he revealed on his Facebook page before the council meeting that he would be putting forward a motion that basically says that Israel is using genocidal tactics against the Palestinians in Gaza. He also quoted Trevor Noah, the woke US comedian, talk show host, and said Israel was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. So he made he didn't hide what his personal view of the situation was. He was coming out very much in favour of the Palestinians. Here's a bit of him talking at the council meeting on Tuesday night.
The Israeli government turns a blind eye and actively supports illegal settlements on the West Bank, the stealing of land and homes in the West Bank, the blockade of Gaza, of the Gaza Strip now for many years, and also an increasing, almost like apartheid-like laws for the Arab minority within Israel itself.
Now, Chris, you'll remember this is the council that back in 2017 voted not to recognise Australia Day on January 26th. So it has somewhat of a history of pulling these sorts of moves, or maybe some people might label them stunts. I believe that they genuinely think they're doing the right thing, but it will be debated again in a couple of weeks because an independent councillor who voted against this motion has put forward a rescission motion.
Thanks for bringing us up to date, Caroline. Just a remarkable story. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Caroline Marcus there reporting for Sky News on this story. I tell you what, the United Nations is not going to quiver in its boots about what the Yarra City Council is doing. They're going to rush the Yarra City Council resolution into the UN Security Council. The Yarra City Council ought to stick to roads, rates and rubbish instead of sticking its nose into international affairs. If they look at the Constitution, that's the purvey of the federal government. This sort of mealy-mouthed, one-sided intervention where they portray always Israel as the aggressor is really quite sickening. How would the Yarra City Council go if people from Hawthorn started firing missiles in? Would they want to defend themselves? Let's catch up with the former Labor member for the then electorate of Melbourne Ports, Michael Denby. Thanks for joining us, Michael. I was going to talk to you about the Middle East situation anyway, but you must be disturbed about a council in your own city buying in this way.
Well, it sounds like an ugly version of Peter Sellers' The Mouse That Roared. I mean, really, you're right. Local councils should stick out of this. And, I mean, if they're concerned about one legal case in Israel and Sheikh Jarrah, 4 houses out of 300,000 Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, does that justify sending 3,500 missiles into the civilian areas of Israel? Really? I mean, Councillor Jolly and the Green Party should lift their game. It's pathetic logic. You know, then the lack of imagination too from so many of these woke commentators, you know, Waleed Ali and Sophie McNeil on the project. Israelis are going and their families rushing to the shelters. They have 15 seconds in Sderot to get there. They have 45 seconds if it's a bit further north in Tel Aviv. Thank heavens the Iron Dome is protecting them, but it's also the question, Hamas has all of these concrete tunnels under Gaza. Why aren't any of them available for the civilians of Gaza? Or they're only built for warlike purposes with the foreign aid.
Yeah, they're only for the terrorists and the weapons.
It's only room for rockets down there.
You talk about some of the bias we see in the media here. You see it in other Western liberal democracies as well. Now, it's not just a media bias story, is it? Because that plays into the politics. One of the reasons Hamas gets away with this is they get so much sympathy from the international media.
Well, they're trying to use this as leverage, as a military tactic for being able to blanket a nearby democratic state with missiles. Now, the Israelis have to go to the shelters, as I say, every 3 to 5 hours while these missile attacks are on. They're sending them in salvos, Iranian tactics, so that they can overcome the Iron Dome. And, you know, lots of people have been injured. A dozen killed. I mean, imagine it happened to Australia where Melbourne had to close down every 3 or 4 hours. It's bad enough during lockdown. Imagine we had missiles arriving here, landing on Carlton and Abbotsford if the Green Council wanted to reimagine this. And people had to stop work or hide in bomb shelters every 3 or 4 hours. It makes life unviable. And the lack of imagination by the woke in addressing this on both sides is just astonishing.
Would you like to see your own party, the Labor Party, federally take a stronger view?
Well, I'd like the Labor Party to agree with the government that Israel has a right to self-defence. I think so far they've kept fairly quiet on that. I don't agree with the views of Jodie Mackay, as I explained to you last Friday, in supporting one side only. Imagine if the rockets were being shot off from Lakemba against the rest of Sydney. Come on, Jodie, you're not very popular with the traditional Labor voters there in Sydney. I don't think they'd be very happy with that.
Thanks for joining us, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. More chance here than on a Labor Party conference.